This episode of Bullet Heaven was made possible with a copy of the game provided by Onion Games. We checked out Zero Ranger on episode 226 of Bullet Heaven, and it showed us all that a vertical scrolling shooter could still be made with tons of surprises up its sleeve. The same can definitely be said of horizontal scrollers as well, as one of the most bizarre, twisted, dark, and imaginative shooters of its type just so happens to be on the Switch and Steam. Blackbird is a horizontal fourth-scrolling shoot-'em-up developed and published by Onion Games. It was released to the Nintendo Switch on October 18, 2018, followed by a Steam release on October 31st. Its gameplay definitely resembles the Sega classic Fantasy Zone at a glance, but it also features quite a few unique aspects that make it a pretty strategic game. Let's take a closer look. The idea behind Blackbird is pretty simple. Players are tasked with destroying a number of enemy structures placed along a looping stage, much like the cross between Fantasy Zone and Defender. These enemy emplacements are displayed on a Defender-style map on the bottom of the screen in gold, but will burst and turn to dark gray when destroyed. Blackbird is also a very simple game in terms of its inputs. It has typical 8-way control via the D-pad and left analog stick, but the player's rate of movement is identical regardless of the method of input. Believe it or not, we felt more comfortable with the analog control this time around. Players fire their main shots with the A button. The player's rate of fire is adequate to start, but only 3 fired shots can be on screen at a time. Like Defender and Fantasy Zone, the player's shots will be fired in the direction that the player is traveling. There is a very slight scroll speed in the direction that the player faces as well, so care should probably be taken when focusing on larger enemies and emplacements so as not to collide with them. A bomber attack can also be deployed by pressing the X button. Not only does this bomber do a pretty good job of clearing out enemies and shots, it can be super helpful with boss fights. But the bomber can also factor into scoring as well, which we'll look into shortly. Care should be taken though, the bomber is only localized to a small radius at first, though this radius grows with additional power. Players start with a life stock of 5 and a bomber stock of 3. Getting hit will reduce the player's life by 1 point, but players can also recover and grow their life stock to a maximum of 8. In addition, the bomber stock maxes out at 6. Players can collect life, speed, and bomber pickups by breaking pots that can be discovered all over any given stage. The item dropped can be cycled by shooting it. Yellow grants life, blue will grant speed, and purple will add a bomber to the stock. Some are hidden better than others, but only a certain amount of these exist in any one stage. And this can create a bit of a strategic situation with regards to how players should progress. This is something that we really loved about the game on the whole, and it really makes for a cerebral approach to the otherwise straightforward concept. Along the way, a huge amount of opposition both from the ground and the air will also need to be dealt with. As a tiny bird, this can be challenging, but all enemies that players dispatch will drop green crystals that will grow a green ring around the player. Some enemies will drop larger ones than others, which will have greater values according to their size. Care should be taken though, as these crystals will shrink in size and value the more they bounce off of the ground. As such, picking them up quickly is obviously a priority. In an interesting twist, a great number of enemies will spawn in the stage in time with the background music. This allows players to anticipate certain waves and patterns of enemies depending on where in the musical piece they are. Attacking the target emplacements will also cause them to spawn more enemies as a defense to the player attacking them. Both situations, of course, result in yet more crystals. When the ring around the player is complete, the bird will increase in size and power. More larger shots will be fired with a more powerful bird, and it becomes ever more creepy as it grows with each level. Its visual size is only for show though. Only getting hit in the bird's eye will cost the player life. When all of the targets in the stage are dealt with, an alarm will sound and players will take on the stage end boss. In this phase, players can only fire to the right, adding a layer of challenge to these parts of the game. When the boss is defeated, its debris will fall to the bottom of the screen and transform into gems, which can be used to quickly boost a player's progression to their bird's next level. Blackbird is played over the course of 4 stages, which sounds pretty short, and to an extent it is. However, players cannot continue at any point of the game. Once they run out of life, it's game over, and that's it. This means that any completion of the game is actually a 1-credit clear. But it's also here that the player then unlocks the much harder True mode, which not only ratchets up the amount of enemies and the speed of their shots, but also features hidden characters and multiple endings. So for players that want more challenge than the base game offers, not to mention additional morsels to this simple yet intriguing story, this is a great additional mode, and it's one that we're loving the moderate depth of. But there's even more to Blackbird though, especially when it comes to its wealth of scoring mechanics. Blackbird might seem a little on the short side, but players looking to get more out of the game will no doubt appreciate its scoring. We've been making increasingly good progress on the online leaderboards, and there's all sorts of ways to really get the most out of each stage. Firstly first, enemy destruction will play a pretty heavy part with regards to getting as high a score as possible. Not only will taking out a complete wave of enemies result in a bonus score, a combo system that multiplies these points to a maximum of 30 times can be built up so long as the gauge above the readout doesn't deplete. But that's really just the tip of the iceberg. There are all kinds of hidden score points pretty much everywhere in Blackbird, way more than can be described here. Sometimes it's a bunch of enemies coming out of a wall. Other times players can hit a weather vane or maybe a windmill a bunch of times and it'll explode, giving bonus points. Or maybe they'll launch a rocket, or maybe a sentient sprig of asparagus will launch from the ground. There's just so much here, it's a little ridiculous. In addition to all of these hidden scoring points, there's also a secondary multiplier that will boost enemy special destruction scores as well, sometimes beyond 40 times. These bonuses can result in seriously high single payout scores that can boost the player's pointage nicely, but it's a little hazy as to how to trigger these special multipliers as they do not correlate with the main multipliers through enemy destruction. With a scrutinous eye though, we discovered that the special multiplier is applied for successive enemy wave clears and special scores achieved without getting hit. If the player is hit in any way, the multiplier is broken and it needs to be restarted. But the real huge mid-stage scores in Blackbird actually come from bombers, so players looking to score high in this game are going to want to perfect their dodging skills in order to amass as many bombers throughout the playthrough as possible. The bomber will draw in all enemies within a radius based on the bird's level, and it will multiply the score with the highest multiplier achieved at the time. This multiplied amount can also be further multiplied as well, based on how many enemies are taken out and how big the bomber is. This technique can result in multi-million point bonuses if carefully performed. At stage end, additional factors can lead to giant bonuses as well. Getting as good a time as possible will add tremendously to the bonus payout, which is only 1,000 points at its bare minimum. These points can, once again, be multiplied for even more pointage by way of how many enemies the player takes out in that amount of time. So the higher the number of enemies defeated and the lower the time, the better the bonus will be. The depth to the scoring in Blackbird is pretty incredible, even if the exact mechanics of them are a little vague. When it comes to Blackbird's online leaderboards, the player's score is ranked as soon as game over occurs, so players can immediately see exactly where they stand at a glance, which is fantastic. Given that Blackbird isn't terribly long, this allows for a great focused score chaser, which is sure to keep players coming back for more. Never mind just talking shmups, Blackbird has one of the best presentations we've experienced in a game, period. This is the kind of game that sells itself on visuals and music alone, never mind that it's a fun, dark game in and of itself. When we first turned it on, we knew it was going to be special and we were definitely not disappointed. First, the story. Blackbird tells the tale of a nameless girl who dies in the street of a Victorian city. Passers-by don't seem to realize that she has passed to the other side, save for one man, who merely confirms it by poking her remains with his cane before moving on. What an asshole. No worries though, as the girl is soon reborn as the havoc-wreaking Blackbird, and vengeance will be hers. The story is definitely dark and even a little disturbing at times, but interesting at the very least. It even continues beyond what is found in the normal mode with additional new intermissions as players make their way through the much harder True mode. Visually, Blackbird makes use of a muted color scheme and noisy, artifacted sprites and backgrounds to give it a gritty, dirty look, which works really well for the implied time periods it takes place in. Whether in the Victorian-style town, the rain-soaked city streets, or the future mechanized facility, each stage drips with the personality players will find nowhere else. Well, except for games like Million Onion Hotel for obvious reasons. A number of characters and elements have been carried over from Onion Games' previous works, many of which are hidden in the game's True mode. If anything else, we did feel as if the visuals here were just a bit too grainy at times, but again, it does work in the game's favor in the end. But the real standout has to be the insane sound design. There has been absolutely nothing like this in a shooter before, with an almost operatic, warbling chorus belted out in a fictional, nonsensical language that, once again, syncs up with the number of the enemy waves as they appear. It's just so weird and bizarre, we can't help but absolutely love it. There's all kinds of effects throughout each stage that really stand out as well, particularly when secret score points are discovered. Enemy death noises are also equally as bizarre as the music. A simple menu with a leaderboard and options to tweak the sound balance and change the game's language between English and Japanese is all that players will find in the main menu of the game. It's simple and to the point, with a nice font to boot. Both the Steam and Switch versions are also pretty much on par with each other for extras. The Steam version does not have achievement support or trading cards, though these could be patched in later. So players will have exactly the same experience regardless of the version played. So how does Blackbird stack up? Let's take a look. Blackbird's controls work fairly well, but we would have liked it if the shots were locked into place when firing rather than switching direction with the player's movement. Blackbird seems easy on the outset, but once True Mode opens up, get ready. 4 stages seems pretty short, and they can be, especially for players blasting through the game. It can be done in 15 minutes, but the True Mode opens a lot more game, giving Blackbird a decent overall length. The visuals in Blackbird are pretty fantastic with an excellent sense of style all the way through. We think they're just a touch too grainy, yet it still works for Blackbird's style. But there's nothing more to be said about the sound in Blackbird than this. It's a fever dream for your ears in the very best ways. From the level up system to its incredible music-based enemy waves, Blackbird is simply one of the most creative shooters to be found on the Switch and beyond. The only real sticking point to Blackbird may be its price. At $20 it's a bit on the pricey side, but we'd wager it's more than worth it just to experience this game's charms and discover the secrets to its story. We didn't really know what we were getting into when we first booted up this game, but we're glad we got to check it out. Blackbird is absolutely an amazing off-the-wall crazy shooter that begs to be played by more people. Blackbird gets a 4.75 out of 5. You can get a copy of Blackbird on Steam or the Nintendo eShop for about $20. That was a fantastic game. I think even if this was the most creative shooter we play in the next 5 years or more from today, I'm okay with that. It really is something special. Speaking of special, we're gearing up to bring you a review of the long-awaited Game Paradise Cruise & Mix special, followed by Rival Megagun. I'd also like to extend thanks to our newest patrons. There's so many of you now. We're gaining speed, but we're not there yet. If you'd like to support the show, consider becoming a patron for just $1 an episode. That's, at most, a mere $4 a month. If we can get just 6% of our viewership to do that, Bullet Heaven can go full-time. Links in the description below.